Well, for today's prophecy update, it's going to be very short compared to what it usually is. Would appreciate your prayers for Pam and I. We're home under the weather, so this is going to be just sort of a screen recording. I do have an interview at the end of this with Brian Schrager of Jerusalem Journal. Just pray for us. We've got a nasty virus, and would appreciate your prayers that we could recover quickly from that. We talk a lot of times about the convergence of events. And again, it's something that we see each week as I go through and prepare these updates, that things are aligning quite well and they are converging just as the scriptures would say. Some of the things, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the things in culture, and then we'll get into some things about the Middle East, and then conclude with the interview with Brian Schrager. But this is interesting to show you sort of the Romans 1 world that we live in, that people have really been given over to a mind where they are not able to reason. Here's an article from Breitbart about Brown University, which is considered one of the elite American universities. It's an Ivy League school. You supposedly have to be very intelligent to get there. It appears, though, that you don't need to be very intelligent to work there and run the place. But they have now announced that in their application process, they will allow applicants to self-identify as a person of color. So in other words, you can believe we've now reached the stage where truth is what you think truth is. So someone like Elizabeth Warren, who I think the president made a mistake in referring to as Pocahontas. He should have referred to her as Pocahontas, because even though there's no proof in her history of any Cherokee blood, she claimed that she was 132nd or 168th Cherokee, and therefore identified on her application at the university as a Native American. So in other words, Brown is only formalizing the policy that Elizabeth Warren informally followed. Here's another educational training thing for children that somebody sent me, and this is for Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. And I love Canada. It's beautiful. But they have some problems, and they're on some of these things they're just a little bit ahead of the United States. But it's no longer LGBT or LGBTQ. The proper acronym, if you want to be inclusive, is LGGBDTTTIQQAAPP. So you might want to write that down and memorize it. LGGBDTTTIQQAAP. That stands for lesbian, gay, genderqueer, bisexual, demisexual, transgender, transsexual, two-spirit, intersex, queer, questioning, asexual, allies, pansexual, and polyamorous. This is just, as you can appreciate, this is proof that we live in a Romans 1 world. Over in Australia, they passed the same-sex marriage bill. I believe it's getting through both of their houses of parliament that they have. There's been some hope on the part of conservatives that they would build some religious freedoms into the bill. And everything that I have seen indicates that they don't care what the conservatives think, and they're just going to ram this bill through, and Christians are going to start having legal unemployment problems as a result. And so what happens in Canada doesn't stay in Canada in this day and age, and what happens in Australia doesn't stay in Australia. And the same things that are going to happen in short term in Australia are to some extent already happening here in the United States, and they're going to happen in other countries as well as these things move forward. I wanted to bring this up. This was from a Facebook page of a person who was inviting people to the Reformation Project National Conference, which took place about a month ago I think in Chicago. What they were, this is the Reformation Project, was started by Matthew Vines, and it is to help conservative evangelical churches become LGBTQ friendly. And I will note for the record that this lady, obviously she's not hip enough to know that the LGBTQ, an acronym, is so yesterday. She really needs to update her sensitivity and inclusiveness training. Her biography identifies herself. She was raised in a conservative church. Her husband was, for a time, a Southern Baptist pastor in, I believe, Atlanta. They now live in St. Petersburg, Florida. But she was, for a time, on the staff of the Reformation Project. She has a PhD from Florida State. Her husband went to the seminary at Mercer University. That's the university where David Gushee is one of the professors, and he came out a few years ago at a Reformation Project seminar as gay affirming, and essentially said that, we need to reform the church, we need to change these things, because we just shouldn't be interpreting Scripture like we always did. It's a cancer in the evangelical church, or what claims to be the evangelical church, that certain things pass for acceptability. One of those examples that we can use on many occasions is Hillsong Church, specifically the pastor of Hillsong, New York, Carl Lentz, who fashions himself as this hip young pastor and generally comes out as best as squishy on biblical issues. Here's a little commentary by Ben Shapiro about Carl Lentz's appearance on The View. This probably happened about a month ago. Listen to what he says, and I agree with what Ben Shapiro says here. I think his analysis is very good, and I just guess I wish other evangelical pastors would take sort of the same approach. Listen to this.
This brings up a broader critique of the role of religion. So it's really funny. The left says prayers are good, but only if they are directed in our direction. Now, what people who are conservative believe, conservative religious people, is that the direction for the prayer is basically toward God, which means that you actually have to look at what God's agenda is in particular circumstances. God is not just something out there that is non-discoverable. The Bible is pretty clear about this. Right? In Deuteronomy, Moses specifically says, it is not in heaven where you can't understand it. It's down here. God, the whole purpose of having a revelation is that you understand things. Now, not everyone has to believe in Revelation. You don't have to believe in Revelation, right? You can be skeptical of Revelation. But if you say you believe in Revelation, at the very least, you should be adherent to the Revelation. Right? If you say you're a Bible-believing person, you should at least believe in the Bible. In the same way that if you believe in global warming, you should at least believe in global warming. Right? Whatever you're going to believe in it. Otherwise, you're a liar. Well, Hillsong, there's a megachurch pastor. I don't know Hillsong particularly well, but there's a guy named Carl Lentz, apparently, who's quite popular and dresses in very odd fashion. And he was on The View wearing glasses that he apparently got from a Forever 21 and a medallion that I don't know what it represents, but he looks kind of like Marky Mark from 1991. In any case, Carl Lentz is a very popular pastor. Maybe he's great. I don't know. But what he said here was not great, right, on The View. So he's on The View, and he is asked about abortion, saying abortion is sinful. And here is his answer. This is where religion does fail. Okay, religion doesn't fail just because you don't support gun control. Religion does fail if your Bible says abortion is bad, and then you give this answer.
And it makes
so it's not a sin in your church to have an abortion?
That's the kind of conversation we would have, finding out your story, where you're from, what you believe. Yeah, I mean, God's the judge. People have to live to their own convictions, and I think if I have to tell you, that's such a broad question to me. I'm going higher. I want to sit with somebody and say, where do you believe?
So it's not an open and shut case with you.
Some people would say it is. I think, to me, I'm trying to teach people who Jesus is first, find out their story. Before I start picking and choosing what I think is sin in your life, I'd like to know your name.
Well,
Nonsense. Nonsense. Sin is still sin. That doesn't mean that you have to be mean to people who have sinned. The whole purpose of talking to people is to find out their story. But we have to start from a certain basic premise. Yes, abortion is a sin. Of course, abortion is a sin. And soft peddling it for the left is not going to win you adherents or converts. Soft peddling evil is not going to, soft peddling sin is not going to draw more people to you. It's going to alienate more people from religion, because that's what gets people to believe in this I'm spiritual but not religious nonsense. Okay, whoop-de-doo, you believe in the Force. Congratulations. I mean, can you move objects with your mind? I don't really care if you're spiritual but not religious. The question is what standards you uphold. One of the purposes of religion is to uphold a higher standard, because God has demands of you, not just you making demands of God. This guy got a lot of flack for it, as well he should. Alicia Krause on Daily Wire went after him. She's invited him to come into the Daily Wire offices. I'm sure we would all like to chat with him and find out whether he actually believes abortion is a sin or not. Oh.
Well, that's great analysis. And I'm going to show you one other thing. You know, we've been faced with a lot of these people in the media, government resigning because of sexual harassment, and there seems to be, clearly a feeding frenzy now. Some of these people are creeps, and they deserve to go. But there's going to be innocent people that are caught up in this. And I disagree. I think I saw an editorial in the Washington Post today that said, well, we don't need to worry about due process when men are involved. In fact, there was even an attorney general candidate, I think up in Michigan, that said if you want to get rid of sexual harassment in government, don't vote for anybody that has a male appendage. Which somebody pointed out was clearly insensitive to transgender women who might still have that male appendage, even though they identify as women. It just shows the insanity to which our culture has fallen. And I believe Carl Lentz came out and said, yes, I think abortion is a sin later. I guess my question is, why does he always have to come out and clarify these things afterwards? When he does such a bad job, consistently bad job, defending the biblical position almost every single time he appears in public on a secular program to discuss these issues. The reason is he's really not a pastor. He's a show director. He's a producer of a wonderful light show and rock concert that they have at Hillsong, New York. Sorry, that's just, I think, a pretty accurate assessment of what goes on there. Now, look, there will be some good things that go on there, but it's the mixture that's the problem. Now, this next article I want to show you appeared on the front page of the New York Times on Thanksgiving. And it talked about how young boys are using makeup more and more. And I really hesitated to show this. These are pictures of boys and how they're using makeup to feminize themselves. Someone who commented on this, I can't remember where I read this. It was a blog. I thought that this was quite accurate. I apologize if this is offensive to anyone, but this was on the New York Times website and in the New York Times, and the article started on the front page, young and in love with lipstick and eyeliner, and it discussed young boys, prepubescent boys. And I think this comment that was in this blog is appropriate. One of the healthiest human instincts is to feel your stomach roll over at the sight of sexualized children. Though we might not be able to articulate it, there is a big difference between little kid playing grown-up and this. And that is not a little girl, by the way. That is a young boy, as photographed by the left-wing New York Times, the same magazine, the same newspaper that will come out and supposedly claim the moral high ground on these sexual harassment investigations. Now they will. They refuse to investigate some of these. Some of these were well-known, Matt Lauer and others, Jeffrey Weinstein. The blog continued, if you share this healthy instinct, this particular Times Thanksgiving Day piece, an article tailor-made to appeal to the pedophile, pederast demography, will undoubtedly bruise a piece of your soul. And boy, I think that's a great commentary. Well, now I want to turn to geopolitics. We have a couple of big issues, mainly in with regard to North Korea, the United Nations and Israel itself. First of all, the North Koreans put up a pretty capable ballistic missile, shot it up to about 2,800 miles altitude, and it is a game changer. It indicates that they have far more capability than we thought. Here's a brief Fox News analysis of that.
And the missile that North Korea tested on Tuesday flew 2,800 miles into space for more than 50 minutes. Experts believe that missile has enough range to hit any target virtually inside the continental United States. And South Korea says they can't rule out the possibility that the North will complete its nuclear program within 1 year. Some horrifying facts, if true.
So this test, it looks like, was of something around 150 kilograms. That would put it at the very low end of the size of a nuclear warhead. North Korea's probably not quite there yet, but given the pace of the development of both their missiles and their hydrogen bomb program, where we once thought maybe we had 5, maybe even 10 years, now we're probably looking at maybe 1, 2, or 3 years.
Which is just appalling and frightening, I would imagine, to most Americans hearing about this today. It's something that we imagine as being much farther off. So the idea that it's immediate reality is really horrifying.
Right now, you've got Hawaiians hearing the air raid sirens. The question is, are we going to start hearing that in Chicago and Washington and Denver?
So,
interesting question. Here's a graphic that was made up showing what would happen if a hydrogen bomb reached New York and exploded in Midtown. As you can see, it would have a devastating impact. Easily millions of people would die. Something like this happening in our country would have a huge impact on our country, even if it just hit one city. And now it appears that to the extent that they have the capability, there is the capability to hit anywhere within the United States effectively from North Korea. All they need to do is change the trajectory of the rocket. They need to improve their re-entry, but they're moving along at a much, as this gentleman in the Fox News analysis said, this gentleman from the Heritage Foundation said, listen, we thought that it would take 5 or 10 years for them to get to this point, and they've gotten this far in just literally less than a year. They probably will be ready in a year to do whatever they want to do, if they're not already ready. That's the unknown equation. Well, let's look at some of the situation. This is an interesting article in today's Gatestone Institute by Sarin Kern, talking about Europe's migrant crisis, millions still to come. Title of the article, African Exodus of Biblical Proportions Impossible to Stop. This raises an issue that I probably should talk about more, which is sort of the convergence of the demographic problems that exist, the exploding debt in the world, the aging populations in most of the world, but the effect of immigration and high reproduction rates among immigrant populations into Europe and other Western societies will radically change those cultures in a very short time, much, much more quickly. Which now, at the same time, there are collapsing birth rates in countries such as Iran, which I think narrow the window for when some of these prophetic events will take place. That Iran, we know, is involved. The Bible talks about Persia being involved in at least the Ezekiel 38 and 39 battle that is coming. But Iran is in a bit of a demographic crisis, and so I think that given their penchant, at least among the religious leadership that's in charge of Iran, of trying to push ahead the clock on the eschatological clock, the prophecy clock, the prophecy that they believe in, indicates that these things are going to happen, I think, in very, very short order. Now, speaking of Iran, I'm going to play for you a clip of an Iranian wrestler. Well, just watch what happens here. This is the Iranian wrestlers in the dark uniform. Now, what you see in that clip, he was winning, and they started wrestling against a Russian wrestler, and the Iranian guy, as he rolled around on the mat, I need to shut this thing. Can't shut the sound off on this. There we go. So as he rolled around on the mat, he was exposing his back to the mat, and every time he did that, the Russian wrestler would get 2 points. And because it was past a certain point in time in the match, I think it's past the 5-minute mark, if you're losing by more than 10 points, they just stop the match and award the victory. So here's this Iranian wrestler who had won the gold medal in other competitions. He was wrestling this Russian that I believe he had beaten before, and you saw he essentially rolled around the mat, exposing his back to the mat, giving the Russian wrestler 2 points every time he did that, those little twisty moves he was making. That resulted he threw the match. Now, why did he throw the match? Well, he threw the match, he admitted later, because his coach told him that if he won, he was going to have to wrestle an Israeli Jewish wrestler in the next round. So rather than do that, this Iranian champion wrestler threw the match. It's indicative of the problem that we have. Here's an article in the Times of Israel about some training that's going on among the IDF preparing for a future war in Gaza. They've been having massive military exercises over the last couple months, preparing for a war in Lebanon. So this is what's happening. And the nations are aligning, as we said in Ezekiel 38. We've seen Iran, Russia, Turkey had a meeting. There's still a component of Kush and put that need to align. And here is Putin this week in Russia meeting for the first time with the head of Sudan, who actually has trouble traveling internationally because he's wanted for war crimes. But here's Putin meeting with the head of Sudan, which is biblical Kush. So yet more of the prophetic alignment comes into place. Now, this week in the UN, there was some couple significant things that happened. First, there was a resolution that was voted on either the day of or the day after the 70th anniversary of a Resolution 181. Resolution 181 was voted on and enacted by the UN in a lake resort outside of New York in their temporary headquarters at the time on November 29th, 1947, 70 years ago this week. And what it did was it partitioned the land that we now know as Israel and the West Bank, or the Palestinian areas. And here you see the map on the left of how the partition was going to work. The orangish areas were to be the Arab areas, and the green areas were to be the Jewish and Arab areas, because it was only determined that the Jews couldn't live in the Palestinian areas. And here you see on the right, you see actually the tally sheet from that UN meeting showing what happened. And what's interesting is that when they did this, they essentially adopted these things on the day that they were voting on the anniversary of this event. This is shows a little bit of the map about how the partition was going to work and some of the people that were involved actually in that meeting on November 29th, 1947, voting on a resolution, a UN resolution 181, which led to the creation of the Jewish state of Israel. It would have led to an Arab state of Palestine, but the Palestinians never accepted it. And so here are the people in the meeting. You've seen Abba Eban there and some of the other diplomats that were involved. And this was, Israel had to get, the Jewish state of Israel had to get a 2/3 approval vote of this. So on November 29th, 1947, they met, and here's a little bit of what happened during the voting process.
Those who are in favor will say yes, those who are against will say no. And the abstainers, always they know what to say.
Ethiopia, abstain. France, yes.
I call on the public, and I hope that you will not have any interference on the voting on the debate. I am confident on the way you will behave in a so serious decision taken by this assembly, because I am decided not to allow anybody to interfere in our decision.
United Kingdom, abstain. United States, yes. Uruguay, yes. Venezuela, yes. Yemen, no. Yugoslavia, abstain.
The resolution of the DUC Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
So the vote was 33 for, 10 against, or 13 against, 10 abstentions. This is interesting, though. One of the celebrations that took place of this vote took place at the Arch of Titus in Rome. And here you see them giving prayers of thanks for the creation of the Jewish state. So there they went to the place where effectively the Jewish state was, any hope of a Jewish state was effectively terminated in 70 AD, although there were later attempts. But Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. The temple was destroyed. And so there at the arch that was erected to commemorate that destruction of Jerusalem, they had a vote they had a prayer service to thank God for the creation after almost 2,000 years of a new Jewish state in the land where they always hoped that they would return. It's a stunning thing to watch, and it's very interesting. But what they do at the UN each year, on the day that they vote for, they celebrate the anniversary of this Resolution 181. It is now Palestinian Day. And so what they do is they have these resolutions, and this year, without fail, they adopted 6 anti-Israel resolutions declaring Israel's actions in the Syrian Golan, East Jerusalem, null and void. They adopted 6 resolutions on Palestine and the Middle East. Here is I'm trying to think. One of the interesting, I guess, ironies of this was one of the people who spoke in favor of the anti-Israel resolutions was the representative of the very tolerant, freedom-loving country of Venezuela. And he gave a speech in favor of these resolutions. Here you see the vote tally. There was a report of the Secretary General that was given to discuss what the Secretary General had found. That came out in early November. You can find that online. This is from UN Watch. And what they'd done is they had tallied the number of resolutions against Israel this past year. In 2017 was 20 resolutions. The rest of the world, which would include Syria and all these other countries that have problems, Myanmar and other places, they combined got 6, but Israel got 20. The United States has spoken out against this very strongly. I think the United States even said with regard to the immigration thing that they were, I just saw this morning, that we were going to withdraw from the International Compact on Migration. Here's just a couple comments, just a couple minutes of some of the comments made in support of these resolutions by different representatives at the UN. The first one is from, I'm not sure, it might be Kazakhstan. The second one, is the lady is from Maldives.
As we observe
Iran,
the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people today, it is very unfortunate that in the course of last year, no progress has been made towards ending the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian land. We regret that the efforts made thus far by the international community have proven inadequate due to intransigence on the part of the Israeli regime and its continued unlawful criminal acts and policies against the people of Palestine.
The continued and illegal occupation of Palestinian lands by Israel is the most protracted conflict in the Middle East, and its resolution, a fair and just solution based on the relevant UN Security Council resolutions, will be vital in bringing peace and tranquility to the Middle East. The establishment of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital on the Palestinian lands with pre-1967 borders living side by side with Israel is the only solution and the only answer to the question of Palestine.
And so two of the resolutions, one was a resolution on the Syrian Golan, and the vote on that was essentially, I believe the end result was 150. There were 6 against, 105 in favor, 6 against, and 58 abstentions. The 6 included a few small countries, Canada and the United Kingdom and the United States against. That was an unusual vote for the Canadians. That resolution with regard to the Syrian Golan talked about stressing the illegality of the Israeli settlement construction and other activities in the occupied Syrian Golan since 1967. And then the resolution with regard to Jerusalem mentioned this, expressing its grave concern in particular about tensions, provocations, and incitement regarding the holy places of Jerusalem, including the Haram al-Sharif, and urging restraint and respect for the sanctity of the holy sites by all sides. But they don't refer to this as the Temple Mount. They only refer to it by its Muslim name. And as we know, the Muslim presence in Jerusalem never came about until almost 700 AD. And again, this one, the voting results were 151 in favor, 6 against, and 9 abstentions. And again, I think it was the same 6 countries that voted against this. There's an interesting juxtaposition of this occurring. This was Resolution 2334, which was voted on about a year ago. If you recall, at the end of the Obama administration, they came and they were raising the issue of this. They wanted to partition Palestine, and the change was in the United States position was that we usually vetoed those resolutions, but this time at the end of the Obama administration, we refused to abstain. We abstained, which allowed this resolution to be adopted. Now, it was a huge change in policy. What was happening at that time, though, was that the incoming Trump administration was lobbying people to vote against that resolution or to veto that resolution, including reaching out to Russia. And now Mike Flynn, General Flynn, who was with the Trump transition team and then later National Security Council head, he was one of the contacts he made was with Russia. And they had this all on tape. They had this national security tapes, and then they asked Flynn about this in his FBI interview. And he said that he did not have contact, which was not true. But I don't know why they needed to ask him, because they had all the security tapes that would show that he did this. Why didn't they just ask him or give him the opportunity to refresh his recollection? Because this is a game that prosecutors play. They bring people in for FBI interviews, and even though there's maybe no underlying crime or they haven't done anything wrong, they will try to trick them and trap them into saying something that is a lie. And so now Flynn has pled guilty about this, with the implication that, well, if they were trying to lobby Russia in the transition period between the election and Trump actually taking office on January 20th, then they must have been contacting Russia beforehand. You just trust me, this is the direction that Mueller is going, unless somebody does the right thing and fires him and gets rid of him. Let's see, there's a couple other things I want to just touch on briefly. The issue of moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Trump has to make a decision on the waiver, where he's going to execute another waiver to put that off for a while. There's some talk that he will waive moving the embassy to Jerusalem, which is allowed under the statute, but he will declare Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel. The Palestinians and Jordanians have responded to that if you recognize Jerusalem as the capital, you're going to fuel Palestinian violence. Caroline Glick has a good article from Friday Jerusalem Post talking about from Amman to Jerusalem, about how, they want to put on trial an Israeli diplomat who killed somebody when he was attacked in somebody got killed in self-defense. And until they agree to criminally prosecute that person in Israel, the Israeli embassy in Amman, Jordan, will not be reopened. And Carolyn makes a good point. Look, don't open it and move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, because this is not going to affect the peace process. They're not happy about it anyway. So I'm going to close today with, I have a few other things. There's a couple good articles. I think I'll cover them next week about how, these are from Geopolitical Futures, and there's been a number of articles about how Iran is reshaping the Middle East and how Israel is kind of being put into a very complex situation, and how do they deal with this situation. What happened Saturday on Shabbat, which was kind of interesting, was that there were airstrikes that took place in Syria. Those airstrikes took place at an Iranian airbase. I had mentioned that a few weeks ago in one of my updates. Excuse me. And you can see here on the map where that took place. So I talked a little bit about that attack and some other things that were going on in the Middle East, the move of the embassy, or the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, with Brian Schrager of Jerusalem Journal, publisher of the Haim Report. I'm going to play that interview now, and that will be the end of this week's prophecy update. So we'll see you next week, but close this out by listening to Brian Schrager's very insightful comments. I'm here with Brian Schrager of the Jerusalem Journal, publisher of the Haim Report, a daily collection of news updates from the Middle East and other things that touch on Israel. Brian, good to talk to you this morning.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you too, John.
So let's talk a little bit about probably the most pressing item of news is this attack which occurred yesterday in Syria, done by Israel yesterday in Syria. Tell us what you know about it and why it happened and the implications of it.
Well, it's very interesting because what happened is Israel, allegedly and almost certainly it was Israel, struck an Iranian military base that has been under intense development in southern Syria for some time. It actually was made public about 3 weeks ago. It came out in the press, and so this is not, the location is not unknown to the world even. It appears that Israel was standing back, hoping that Russia or the U.S. would take some meaningful steps to keep Iran away from its border, especially its military personnel and its proxy military personnel. But that wasn't happening. So what's interesting is that after several weeks have gone by with knowledge of this military base, it was hit on Shabbat morning yesterday, about 8:30, I think, Israel time. So why? At first I thought perhaps it was because Israel felt that Iran would not expect an attack on Shabbat. But in fact, there was another reason. Debka, which is an intelligence news service here in Israel, reported that there was a top secret meeting happening at this location of Iranian military chiefs and some Shia military leaders. And so Israel knew exactly what it was doing. It wasn't just hitting the base. It was actually hitting Iran very directly in terms of its military presence in Syria. And this top secret meeting wasn't quite so top secret as they hoped it would be. Clearly it wasn't.
And so what do you think are some of the implications of that? I mean, given the fact that it's involved, from what I've heard, Shia militia commanders and other Iranian officials, what's the thinking as to what the response will be and what'll happen?
Iran is not going to have any help from Russia, although Russia is clearly aligned with Iran in Syria. It's aligned with Iran to defeat ISIS, and that's Russia basically doesn't care if Israel and Iran have it out with each other. They're standing back. So right now, Iran is not responding very much. It did come out with a statement that it has secret cells all around the Middle East ready to act upon its command. It seemed to be kind of a desperate gasp or response to what happened in Syria. So I'd be interested to see what they actually do in the next few days. We're not seeing it yet.
And what was Netanyahu's response?
Oh, well, Netanyahu had recorded an interview to be broadcast in the U.S. later this week. And immediately after, this was recorded before the attack, but immediately after Shabbat, he released a 17 to 20 second clip in which he says Israel is not going to tolerate the military presence of a regime that is devoted to the annihilation of the Jewish state. And so while Israel's not explicitly acknowledging it did the attack, Netanyahu's statement is a virtual acknowledgement that, yes, we did this, and here's why.
Well, earlier in the week, too, you had some stories that related to Iran and its view, at least its leadership's view, its religious leadership's view of the Mahdi. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's really important to understand that Iran is not just motivated by military ambition. Yes, we know it wants to rebuild itself as a Syrian empire. It wants to complete the land bridge it has all but constructed now from Tehran to the Mediterranean. It wants to solidify that, make sure the infrastructure of that is now built on and is usable for them. But they're not just motivated by conventional military gain. The supreme leader of Iran just this week came out with an article on his website in English stating that he sees that the Mahdi is near. The Mahdi is Shia Islam's that is coming back Islam into becoming the global religion of the world. Apparently something like 2/3 of the world will be destroyed. The remaining 1/3 in its entirety will be Islam. When the Mahdi comes, according to the eschatology, Jesus is going to come with him and declare. So this is, it sounds wild to Western ears, but this is a visceral motivation for Iranians who see the blessing of Allah in what they have accomplished in building this land bridge. And from Syria and Lebanon to the Mediterranean. So they have made significant gains. They have played their cards well, and they are rather ecstatic about it. And they see this Mahdi coming, but there's one thing standing in the way of the Mahdi's appearance, and that's Israel. And so with this visceral motivation, Iran is not going to quickly back away from destroying the Jewish state, because they believe that it's necessary to destroy Israel in order for their Mahdi to come, for them to get their global caliphate. ISIS was attempting to establish itself as a global caliphate. Well, Iran is the same thing. It's doing the same thing, the very same motivation. It's just Shia, not Sunni, and it has a vision for global domination. It's going by the Mahdi, and the Mahdi will come in, and because they've been the leaders, they'll be his right-hand people, to do this.
Sure. And then one of the other, I guess, important items in the news is this controversy as to whether the United States is going to relocate its embassy to Jerusalem or just declare Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And tell us what's going on there with regard to that and how the people are reacting to it, the Palestinians in particular.
It's that Donald Trump has to decide by Monday, tomorrow, whether or not to move the embassy or sign the waiver, which has been signed for a number of years now by several presidents, every 6 months, to delay its move, because it's something that is mandated by law that it should be in Jerusalem, but it's been postponed for decades. In any case, he promised in his campaign before becoming president and since that he would move the embassy. It's not happened yet, largely because of the pressure from the likes of Saudi Arabia, the King of Jordan, and of course of Abbas of the Palestinians, saying that if he did this, it would ruin the chance for peace. It would just bring war. Well, there hasn't been a lot of peace with the embassy staying in Tel Aviv, so I don't think it's going to make much difference if he moves it here or not, no matter the protestation from Hamas or Abbas. So it appears that Trump feels a bit frustrated by having to do something because he's made these promises. His vice president recently said that Trump was committed to moving the embassy, and so Israel, I think, is expecting right now is for Trump to kind of an in-between position and declare Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel, and thereby stand with it in terms of Jerusalem belonging to Israel and being its capital, but not yet moving the embassy. Now, he hasn't actually said that he's not going to move it, but apparently it has been leaked from Washington that he plans to declare Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. It's interesting, he's trying to appease, I think, the Palestinians by making this move, but they've come out and they've just said recently it doesn't make any difference. If you declare it the capital, we're going to cause trouble. There will be violence. They're pledging it.
Yeah.
See. They are actually under a lot of pressure themselves to behave, to reach some sort of an arrangement with Israel. Then the pressure is coming from Saudi Arabia. And it's coming from Saudi Arabia through Egypt. So Egypt right now is working to try to be the middleman to bring about a peace agreement with Israel, at least move it in that direction. And Saudi Arabia is behind us.
It appears in many respects that there's this giant standoff that's going on right now where nobody appears to be, I guess, powerful enough to act on their own. They can only act through proxies or in conjunction with somebody else. So Iran uses proxies, Saudi Arabia uses proxies. The U.S., we're kind of strung out in a number of military fights or hotspots. Now we have this looming problem with North Korea, so we need the help of people in the Middle East. I mean, the Saudis could not have the Saudis are sort of limited in what they can do relative to Iran. Iran has many times the population of Saudi Arabia, and Iran, if you remember, Iran they survived a almost decade-long war with Iraq, in which they lost a million people.
Oh yeah, the mind-blowing number.
And it's taken them a while to come back, but now here they are again. And I think the U.S. is in sort of a weak position, not because we don't have a good military. It's just that we spent the peace dividend many times over, I think, from the collapse in the Cold War. And it's a very interesting thing to watch. It certainly appears that the Ezekiel 38 alignment of nations is coming together.
I think so too.
I think the only one that's sort of out there, but I don't think it'd be hard to get it to come in, would be the Libya aspect, or whatever.
Right.
You know, these countries.
That's developing, as you know.
Right, and these countries that we still call it Syria and Iraq and Libya and Yemen, and they, in many respects, they don't really exist. We just sort of pretend that they do.
Yeah,
because
right.
I don't think anybody wants to just keep erasing their maps and recreating them week by week.
Right.
So, well, anyway, tell people how they can get to the Heim Report and how they can help support you.
Well, the Heim Report mainly is being promoted right now through Facebook. So please come to our Facebook page, the Jerusalem Journal, and like it and follow us, and you can mark it so that the Jerusalem Journal's Heim Report gets first place on your feed. So do that, because you can sign up and still not see it. Facebook has its ways. The Heim Report is the primary thing that the Jerusalem Journal is doing right now. It's kind of like the Drudge Report in the U.S. It's an aggregation of stories from third-party news outlets in Israel and around the Middle East and internationally. And we put the stories together and retitle them often in such a way to show a narrative that you wouldn't see in other news outlets, in any other news outlet, in fact. So it's a good way to get an idea of what's going on in the Middle East, especially if it's especially good for Christians, because this is being put together with them in mind, with Christians who support Israel in mind. The Heim Report, as a publication of the Jerusalem Journal, is in fact a nonprofit. The Jerusalem Journal is a U.S. 501c3. We depend on donations in order to do what we do, and we would love for you to partner with us in this and be part of what's going on right here in Israel in bringing news to the world from an Israeli perspective, bypassing mainstream media in your countries. So yeah, please come to the JerusalemJournal.net. The website is JerusalemJournal.net. You can donate to us there, and you can also donate to us through our Facebook page. So yeah, join us. We could also use some help. There are a number of volunteer positions where we could use help. Sharing the Heim Report every day on social media. There are some administrative things I would love to have help with. So if you feel God's calling you to be involved in Israel in such a time as this, please go to the website, fill out the form, contact me, let me know that you're interested. I would love to talk with you.
Okay, great. And I appreciate your help today, and we'll look forward to talking to you in the near future again.
Thanks, Don. Get better.
Okay, God bless. Thank you.
Okay, likewise. Bye.
Bye.